Okay, this video is about introductions and conclusions. I'm going to give you 5 concrete ways to begin your essays. The beginning of an essay is really, really critical, not just for general writing, but in the college setting. I have found that introductions and the opening of your work is so critical on the impression that you're going to leave on your professor. Um, So at most, a professor sees you 3 to 4 hours a week for 15 to 16 weeks. A professor is not going to develop enough of a relationship with you to know you beyond your work. You are your work in academic settings. And particularly in classes where you have many students, freshman, sophomore classes, the projects will be immediately evaluated, meaning that the moment that a professor opens a work and begins looking at it, those first impressions are going to last a really long time in the rhetorical moment of turning in an essay. The title, the formatting, all kinds of judgments, really snap judgments are made right away. And it's probably actually unfair, but that's the reality that I'm trying to prepare you for. So I really like using the word grabber to talk about this opening, the opening of an essay. I really like the idea of grabber because it really gives you a sense of what you're trying to do with an opening. I've heard writers and writing teachers call it a hook or a lead, and those things are appropriate, but I like the word grab because it really has an aggressive connotation to it. You are getting a reader's attention whether or not he or she wants to give you that attention. You're grabbing the audience. So what a intro does is it stimulates your reader's interest. And we're going to talk a lot about what stimulates us, right? What do we respond to? Even as you're watching this, I bet I can get you to follow. Your eyes are following around the little laser pointer like a cat, because that's something that stimulates your interest. Now, you can't use a laser pointer in writing, so we're going to think about how do we use what we know about psychology and about basic human nature to stimulate interest and connect. So you stimulate and then you connect to the idea of the essay. As I said, it's the first impression on a professor. It's a big, big deal. Often, an introduction should come from a revelation during the writing, a good idea or an engaging detail. I think writers often struggle, and I talk about this in other videos, that they try to introduce essays that don't yet exist. Now that your essay exists, now that there's a body to start introducing, something that comes from the inventive and generative process of writing is probably 80% of the time where introduction ideas come from, something from the course of writing the body of the essay. I've noticed among young writers that oftentimes things they put in their conclusions early on can make good grabbers. And that makes sense because at the end of an early draft, you've spent a lot of time thinking about it, maybe more time in a focused way than you've thought about it yet. And you know what you want to say, and you have a good way to express the deep idea or the main purpose or point of your work. You've figured that out, and so you put in your conclusion, and actually you should take that and put it in your intro and then discuss something different for your conclusion, which I actually talk about through the course of this presentation. So be aware of that one, introductions should not be written before the essay is written most of the time, and often something from the essay will spark an idea that will work well, and that a lot of times your conclusions in early drafts actually make good introductions. Okay. Oops. I'm going to go over 5 strategies of what you can do where you are clearly using an established way to get our attention. And the first one is several concrete, perhaps puzzling details. This is using the power of writing to evoke an image or a scene. I'm going to talk a lot through the course of this discussion of introductions about movies, because the way movies and advertisements get our attention psychologically are things we could emulate. Now, we're not going to be able to use film, but what film is tapping into can often be evocative for us. So this PowerPoint is full of student examples. So there's two examples here. There's one about Harbors of New England, and then there's one about homelessness. These were written by students, and they're examples of the strategy. So the waves smashed against the shore, a constant rumble that numbed the senses. Far in the distance, the sky met the ocean at some indecipherable point. Harbors of New England capture some unique blend of earth and water. This student was writing about place, very similar to the Barrio reading, and he wanted to expose this nature of New England harbor towns, and he used this image of being on a shoreline and looking at the sea. It's evocative. We start imagining the place. We wonder where we're at. It's often used in movies. In fact, one of my favorite movies is Braveheart, which came out the year I graduated from high school in 1995. So I'm sure many of you have never seen it. But it uses this strategy pretty effectively to get our attention. We get the production company credit, and then we get this burst onto a scene that's all about striking images. And this is evoking exactly what skip ahead here. Here it is, that opening scene. This is evoking the same kinds of things that you can do with writing when you work with imagery. A puzzling detail is one that you want to figure out. You know, the word puzzling has some negative connotations for people, but I'm using it in the way in which we want to figure out puzzles. We're drawn to, where are we? What is this place? We're struck by it. In this same vein, you can use writing to engage us, to get us into a place, into a thing. Let's see, I want to get out of this. Back to my PowerPoint. So this strategy is really celebrated in the college world and in writing in particular, because you're using writing to get people to see something. Here's one about homelessness, written by a student. Hetty McBride's dress was torn and dirty. She pushed her shopping cart into an alleyway, pulled out the folded cardboard from the lower rack, and spread it under a fire escape. She was once a grandmother and owned her own house. Now, like thousands of others, she is a social problem, a street bum. So in this one, we're seeing this character, Hattie McBride. We're wondering what's happened to her. It evokes kind of those stereotypical images of the homeless. We see the cardboard. That's a real detail that is spread under the fire escape, and we recognize that she's going to lay in that. That's where she's going to sleep. This imagery pulls at our heartstrings, right? That's called pathos. When you use a strategy to get an emotional response, it can be very powerful. And that's what this writer is using. So there's one strategy, using strong details to create images that evoke a response. Another strategy is a good question. Now, this gets overused a lot, and I think it's because, like, in 8th grade or 9th grade or 10th grade, it's a strategy that's often taught, and people turn to it in a lazy way because it's easy to think of a question. So, an essay about wrestling. Have you ever wrestled? An essay about Lake Michigan. Have you ever been to Lake Michigan? Those are terrible questions because, one, what happens if the audience says no? To get someone's interest, to stimulate them, you probably don't want them to be saying no, right? You want to get them thinking, and no makes us stop thinking. So good questions, a good question can make a good grabber. Good questions are complex, can't be answered with yes or no easily, and intrigue the reader. Intrigue is what we're going for here, right? So this one was this student example was written by someone who's writing about the concept of heaven, trying to expose what it does in our culture. And he thought questions would be really, actually she thought questions would be really a really effective way to get us going. Where will we go when we die? Will what we have done with our lives matter? Is there another world out there? Is heaven more than an abstract dream, a religious concept, an alternate reality of hope and joy? So, big questions like where will we go when we die? Will our lives have mattered? That gets people thinking, right? That's a deep question. It's kind of a cliche to say that, but deep questions are good because the human mind wants to try to answer them, right? And then we start running down that path towards what the writer's writing about. And if you get people running towards your topic, you've done what a grabber is supposed to do. A quotation. There's actually two ways you can use quotations. And a startling or engaging piece of dialogue. So when you use dialogue, which is an exact representation of speech that you denote with quotation marks, you're manipulating a college level reader in a very particular way. Okay, so we could just read this. For God's sakes, get them off the beach, said one of the contest organizers. Get the security people now. Or you could read it, and in my mind, this is what I hear. Every time I see quotation marks, I hear a voice. Yes, I hear voices in my head. Every time I see quotation marks as an advanced reader, I create a voice. For God's sakes, get them off the beach, said one of the contest organizers. Get the security people now. I hear a really grouchy director who's really pompous and arrogant and all those artistic stereotypes. That voice, that use of sound stimulates. During a publicity session at the Miss America contest in Atlantic City, several homeless men crawled out from under a lifeboat the gorgeous women were using as a prop. Cruel as the organizers' words sound, they may reflect a typical attitude toward the homeless. We don't want to think about them. This is another student-written example, and it's very interesting to me. I once had a student who wrote a grabber using each one of the strategies and then thought about them, and she did a great job with all of them, so I've included many of them in this presentation. Using that language, that moment, can be very, very powerful. And I want to encourage you to think about your own topics. I was recently working with a student who was writing about the effects of having a very serious health problem when young. He suffered from a very severe condition in which he had regular strokes, and chances were really good as one of those strokes was going to kill him, and he was 18 years old. And I asked him, I said, what is the dialogue from this experience that you remember that sticks with you? And he said, Rick, I can remember distinctly the doctor giving me the news. And I said, wow, capture that dialogue, capture that scene, use his words to open the scene and get us into this. So I want you to think about the words associated with your topics. If you're writing about what makes a great coach, something that the coach said. If you're writing about what are the effects of having some mental health issues in school, something mean somebody said, or something powerful that your parents said to you, or that a health professional said to you. Um, if you're writing about like why we love hockey, um, uh, I could still remember the song my dad used to sing as we were driving to the hockey game, right? So capturing him, his that tune, thinking about the sounds of a topic are naturally engaging. And again, this is done in movies all the time. I'm going to show you a clip, and I want you to really think about how this movie used sound really, really uniquely. This movie is a little newer than how do I get out of this? A little newer than uh, Braveheart, The Greatest Showman, opening scene. um, this is a very powerful opening. Notice how it's different. Whoops. From the video. There it is. Okay. When I was in the theater seeing this for the first time, I thought something was wrong because first of all, the music was super loud, and usually during these opening credit scenes, you don't get the music from the movie. You get the sounds associated with the brands of the production companies. They have jingles that go with their brands. So that was very unique use of sound, first of all. And then we'll get right into the opening scene in the movie, and then notice how they use sound and text in this. I'm fascinated by they have this really loud, really intense song, and then the text is like as simple and as plain and as boring as you can get. And it's an interesting juxtaposition, and it's all stimulating us because we respond to sound. Okay, great movie. I love it. It's a movie that adults and kids love. Great musical. Go check it out if you haven't seen it. But it's really effective at getting our attention, and that's what grabbers are about. Get people's attention. So the next use of a quotation is to use a famous quote. This is often done, and a lot of times it's done wrong or done poorly. I think again this gets taught in high school, and people just do it out of laziness. Um, the worst thing you can do as a writer is come across as lazy, and by having a poor introduction, that's the effect that you have on your audience. Using a famous quote, particularly if there's a famous person associated with your topic. So if I'm writing about hockey, Wayne Gretzky would be a great person to quote. If I'm writing about football, John Elway, Brett Favre. Those are quarterbacks of my generations. Now it'd be Patrick Mahomes or something like that. But a famous quote, and then if you can, then you must do two things. And when you don't do them, you immediately signal that you're still a high school writer. You must give an attribution. So who said this? And then explain how the quote connects to your topic. Too often, young writers just airmail this quote in the beginning of the essay and then don't do anything with it. You must discuss it. You must explore it. So here's an example of a student who starts to do this. A penny saved is a penny earned. Ben Franklin's famous advice still resonates today. Unfortunately, many young people don't pay enough attention to this lesson. There are many reasons young people struggle with debt, but one significant reason is the use of debit cards. So grabbing our attention with a famous quote by Ben Franklin and connecting it to the idea of debt, which remains a problem for young people today, actually for all people today, debt, right? That connection is what is the bare minimum you have to do if you want to use a famous quote. Famous quotes are very powerful because they're famous for a reason, right? Phrases, aphorisms, which are short, powerful expressions, exist because they work. And they work on their own, so therefore when you put them in your essay, you're borrowing from their rhetorical power. And it is a very effective strategy. But you got to do it right. The last one I'm going to talk about is present several sides of a controversial situation. So if you're writing about something that has some kind of controversy or has some perspectives to it, exploring those perspectives and the controversy can be effective. So this is back to the homeless student writer, the student writing about homelessness. Actually, she had been homeless, so that's why she was writing about it. Being homeless means being powerless, no money, no stake in society, no knowledge of how to escape. Most citizens are ashamed of homelessness, especially of homeless children. Yet without an address, citizens can't vote. So exploring the topic. If you're writing about something that has some sense of controversy or is an issue that society deals with, explore the issue. If you're writing about racism, if you're writing about online education, if you're writing about how we deal with mental health, if you're writing about anything that our society works on, you can use this strategy of the problem or dilemma, and then you're working into your aspect of it. It can be effective. Remember, these strategies aren't going to work for everybody. It's based on your topic. It's based on where you're at in your writing process and the kind of writer you are and the rhetorical effect you want to have on your readers. Lastly, I'm going to talk about conclusions. Conclusions are tough, for sure. Conclusions are very difficult to write, and therefore I think they're very difficult to teach. So sometimes I think in high school they don't get taught at all, or you get a very simplistic approach to them. A conclusion is not just a summary. You can't just tell me what you already said. The typical high school conclusion repeats the thesis statement and somehow wraps up the essay. You don't want to tell me what you just said. Think about how insulting that is. I just read the essay. I don't need you to tell me what it said. The best way I've determined to talk about conclusions is to think about what are the implications of your essay. After reading your essay, what should I walk away with? What should I have learned? What should I have realized? After reading this, so what? Tell me where I can go with the information in the essay. What can I do with it? So let's go back to the example I've been using, which is why people love hockey. If you've read that whole essay and you understand at a deeper level the motivations of hockey fans, you might be moved to go to a hockey game. And a good conclusion would help you do that. Would talk about where to start, or would talk about, or would be an encouragement to go. If you're writing an essay about the effect of dealing with a mental health issue, at the end, as someone in the audience, I want to know, what can I do? If somebody in my life is feeling like this. How can I help? Where can I go? If you have accomplished your goal of exposing, why does that matter? Or how can it matter after I've read it? That's what you really want to think about. Don't just tell me what you said, right? But what are the implications? What does your essay add up to? It can be very difficult. You can consider a different mode. So if you wrote about positives, if you wrote about positives, consider one negative. If you wrote about effects, consider one aspect of definition, right? So you can kind of switch modes a little bit. Think about, so what? I've read your essay. Now what? Don't just repeat your thesis. That's the worst thing to do. That's lazy. That's falling back on what you already know and what you could already do. You got to take the next step. Often connecting to society at large can be a really good idea for a conclusion. Why does this matter in the bigger picture? Why does it matter in this moment? Contextualize it. Give us how to think about this topic right now, where we're at and what we're dealing with. It could be a good conclusion. They're very difficult to write. They take many drafts. It's very difficult to teach. And they're highly individualized. Each time I work with a writer and try to improve their conclusions, there aren't simple things to say. It's, what has your essay done, and how do we explore its implications? You want to give the reader a place to stop, but you also want to give them a place to go. And that's complex, and even saying it, I feel like an idiot, but that's because it's complex. So take these initial ideas, get something down on paper, and then through the course of the writing process, we can improve them. So good luck. Right on. Right on.